Hey, this is something everybody should remember. It applies to everything. If you can't debate it easily and successfully, then you don't really understand it. If you can't, like, sit back with a toothpick, not that I ever used a toothpick, and, like, stare at the ceiling and answer the question or explain something with your brain turned half off, then you definitely don't understand it. I know people lead busy lives today, and like you, unless you, and I've sacrificed a lot to actually understand some of the things that I do. I'm not actually bragging. I mean, I literally have sacrificed an enormous amount. Stuff that, you know, I kind of regret sacrificing, things that normal people take for granted in life to think about some of the big questions. However, it's hubristic and it's an attribute of most of academia that these people think that they know something that they don't actually know. A really prime example of it, and everybody kind of looked up to him like he was a god. He's dead now, but there's like 1,000 copies of this video on YouTube. Type in Feynman explains magnetism. Yeah, he's the guy that everybody looked up to, especially the academic nerds, especially in his day. He had like 1,000,000,000 charisma points. Yeah. I won't comment on how intelligent he was one way or another, but he's just asked a simple question about what is magnetism? What's this thing that exists between two objects? And, just ask a simple question. And he would have actually been considered smart if he said, well, you don't really know. It's one of the big questions in nature. Scientists would love, at least the good scientists would love to know the answer to that, but we just don't know. It's kind of like gravity and a few other things. But he does, and he wiggles and squirms, and he basically says, you're not, I could tell you, but you're not smart enough to understand the answer. Then he talks about an old woman. Everybody should watch. It's like a 7-minute video, and it shows you the hubris. Anyway, somebody was telling me about some guy, professor, I'm not going to say what his last name is. He's got like 2.5 million subs on YouTube, which proves my premise that I've been saying for decades now, is that nothing true is popular, nothing popular is true. And the more popular it is, usually the more false it is. Anyways, another guy of academia, specifically an atomist, and all he does is just parrot the stuff that academia keeps parroting. And I have a list of questions that you could ask these people, and they'll never have an answer. Actually, the answer they will give you, that's not entirely true, is a bunch of blatherskite. Poppycock, nonsense, twaddle, rubbish. They'll say something ridiculous. I've got a little book over here. You can pick up any book, by the way, and if you want to sound like these people sound, it's just you insert the word quantum in every fourth word. You could bring up an article about cutting food. You could bring up an article about gardening. And if you stick the word quantum after every fifth or sixth word, it sounds like you're talking about the current folks in academia that call themselves relativists or quantum professors, or they'll call themselves physicists. They love to use this word that actually has nothing to do with nature. Specifically, quantum is reference to das Lichtquant, a quantity, and by their definition it's based upon a quantity of light, but light doesn't have a quantity. I mean, you could talk about the frequency, we could talk about light, and I've done that over hundreds of videos explaining what light is, specifically a coaxial circuit. It has two components. Ultimately it's one thing. It's actually a reciprocating non-full toroidal field coaxial perturbation, transverse electromagnetic, rarefaction, compression. The rarefactions and specifically the compressions actually are what are interpreted to be photon particles, but this is an arbitrary abstraction. Everything to a hammer is a nail, and everything to these people is an atom, is a particle. These people are actually not physicists, the people in academia that call themselves physicists and relativists. What they are is mathematicians. The religion of mathematicians is that if you can't count it, it doesn't exist, and there's no reason to talk about it. So to them, everything, just like a hammer, everything's a nail. To them, everything is a particle. And understanding them becomes really easy. Throughout the beginning of time, since earliest recorded history that we still have today, everything's been based upon either particles or the ether. And people say, well, ether's been disproved, which is complete nonsense, until you must say, Well, which theory of ether are you talking about? I mean, there's different creationistic religions. There's Judaism and Christianity and on and on and on. I mean, these are all creationistic religions. You can't say, well, that so-and-so has been disproved. I mean, talking about disproving the ether, you must then ask the question, and they always do this, and they never have been asked that serious question. They have by me, but they never get asked that by other people because other people are just not that intelligent. Say, well, and they'll say this, oh, the ether's been disproven. I said, excuse me, sir, Mr. Professor of Academia, which model of the ether are you talking about? I know of myself a little over 260 theories. It's actually over 260. I could repeat off about 50 off the top of my head. 260 theories of the ether since the time of Pythagoras. You know, so when you say you're attacking the ether, oh, the ether model's been disproven. It's like, which model are you talking about? There's thousands of different creationistic models of faith. You know, Yahweh. You know, I'm not going to mention all the different gods of creationistic religions. You know, you say you've disproved one of them. It's like, well, you know, one of them is fine. We'll go with that, and you know, your evidences for that are sustained. But you're not talking about all of them. So they never have an answer, and they're not willing to answer any serious questions because they don't know. And a wise person would say, you know, I don't know. I'm hungry for knowledge. I would like to know the answers to these questions. But they don't say that. They'll actually pretend that they know. And here's something else that's really, really huge, is that nobody ever goes looking for the answers to things that they think they already know the answers to. So see, these are some of the questions that you should ask these expert physicists, and because they don't know. Ask them what a field is. The Greek word is kora. Say, excuse me, sir, just ask the question like a child. Excuse me, what's a field? And they'll actually mention the Maxwellian field equations, but Maxwellian field equations don't define a field. They talk about resultants given in joules, watts, volts, or amps with a vector over a period of time, but that doesn't tell you what a field is in itself, of itself, by itself. What's a field? A field, by the way, is a really simple answer. Once again, if you can't explain it simply to a child, then you don't understand it. Here, little Johnny, want to know what a field is? A field is an ether perturbation modality. That's kind of like saying ice and steam are different temperature and pressure modalities of water. Aren't, little Johnny, you learned that ice, water, and steam is the same thing? Yeah, they are. You know, one is hard, and the other one is hot and gaseous, and the other one's liquid and wet. They're all exactly the same thing, but they're different expressions of the same thing under different pressures. Kind of like the same person that's happy versus the same person that's sad versus the same person that's in love. They're all the same person, but they're under different pressures. In this case, emotional pressures. Little Johnny, being 10 or 12 years old, I get it! Golly! Even my grandfather, who's 66 years old and studied theoretical physics, doesn't know what a field is, but I got it! See? Here's a perfect example. So they never will tell you what a field is, because none of these so-called expert physicians, metaphysicians, excuse me, not metaphysicians, but physicists. Hello. I'll edit that out of this video. I said physician, then I said metaphysician. I have to say physicist. This is what happens when you think about 20 things at once. Ask them what space is, because they reify space, and that's the only thing where Nikola Tesla, and I've been through all of his writings that we have available to us, the only time where Nikola Tesla foams at the mouth with the idea that space has properties, and that you could bend it or warp it or twist it, or it acted upon things. Space, by the way, keeping things really, really simple, because, you know, you need to explain it to little Johnny. What's space? I keep hearing about space. Of course, science fiction has warped everybody's brain. We're about bending space and space tunnels and space this and, you know, Star Trek, Star Wars, all this ridiculous science fiction garbage, which is entertaining but antithetical to facts, logic, and common sense, and specifically to natural order and Mother Nature. Space is no different than a shadow. A shadow is not a thing at all. It has no principality. Specifically, a shadow, of course, is an absence of light. It's a noun in a dictionary, but a shadow is not a thing. It does have attributes, such that you stand in a shadow, you feel cold, but a shadow is not a thing. Neither is space a thing. Space is the after effect of a divergent magnetic field, and ultimately, there's no distinction between the principality and the denotative nature of space between space and a shadow. Yeah? They both kind of have the same attributional states, being black and nothing, but they're not things themselves. So they can't tell you what space is, but they think that you could warp it and bend it, and that's the only time where Nikola Tesla loses his cool. and foams at the mouth like a rabid dog. Not literally, but nearly so. Ask them what gravity is. This is the one time I'll actually give them credit, because if you admit you don't know what it is, then you try to go searching for it. And 99% of the time, these people think they know the answer to things that they absolutely don't know the answer to. Ask them what gravity is. They will flat out admit that they don't know. Actually, explaining what gravity is really simple. Once again, you need to be able to explain it to little Johnny. Little Johnny asks what gravity is. You take some hot socks out of the dryer and you show them the static cling and how they'll actually hold to one another. Yeah? You say, little Johnny, there's no such thing as magnetic attraction. You actually explain to Johnny what magnetism is and so-called magnetic attraction. That's which we call magnetic attraction, which is not magnetism at all, which is dielectric acceleration, specifically point source acceleration. Then you need to explain point source, and I can actually do that to, a young person. Is the same thing we call gravity. And objects, while we accurately observe them to be accelerating towards one another, they never are. They're actually accelerating towards the lowest null pressure point between both. So you can have accurate observations and accurate descriptions, but completely incorrect explanations, and it takes wisdom to know this. Let me say that again because it's so important. You can have accurate observations. Oh, look, these objects are accelerating towards one another. Accurate descriptions, and accurate math, too. But you can have completely incorrect explanations. And that's so really, well, as long as the math works. I've heard that, and I bet you have too. Many, many thousands of, the math works. Math doesn't explain anything. It's a descriptor of an interaction and the accurate replication, numerically, of the interaction that is occurring. But it doesn't explain anything. Math never explained anything. Nobody could look at any formula and say it explains something. It describes an interaction. A repeatable, reproducible interaction, but math does not explain. And then, of course, you need a little class on that. You make someone wiser say, math is great. You can reproduce it, but it doesn't explain anything. Some people actually don't want just, well, as long as the math works. Well, the math does work, but it doesn't explain anything. Ask a scientist, these academicians that are so full of themselves. The cult of quantum, I call them. Also, too, the cult of bumping particles. Ask them what polarity is. They have no idea what polarity is. What's polarity? What's the significance in nature, natura naturans, cosmic mechanics, natural order of polarity? They haven't got a single clue. They think everything is waves. One of their favorite words right after quantum, which... And by the way, tell them, excuse me, sir, excuse me. Everything that we have today are electronic toys and devices and whatnot, which, the electrical grid, invented by, constructed by, including AC generators, Tesla, Faraday, Steinmetz, Heaviside, James Clerk Maxwell, Charles Proteus Steinmetz. I already said Steinmetz. None of these people needed or begged the use of the word quantum. Nothing in nature, there's absolutely nothing in nature you could point to. That's quantum, look at that over there. And people say, what about quantum computers? Well, that's concept reification. I could call my microwave a quantum heating device, but that doesn't give reification to this word quantum. There's absolutely nothing in nature that you can point to and call it quantum. And that's not my opinion. That's a demonstrable fact. Look at that, it's quantum. No, it's not. You used a word to describe something that is explicable. And if it hasn't been explained, that doesn't mean that it gives reification to the idea and concept of das Lichtwand, which is where we get the word quantum from. Also, too, ask any of these scientists about light speeding up after it leaves something, like glass or water. Say, light speeds back up. It's speed, and of course, light is not moving. Light's not an emission. It's not a wave. It's not a particle. It's not a wave-particle duality. And there's certainly no dualities in nature. Duality implying inherent contradiction. They'll say light speeds up after it leaves glass. This is what they'll say. So how do you explain that? Because it breaks the law of conservation of energy. Then, of course, you have to lead them down the road about what light actually is. And, of course, Nikola Tesla accurately said light is a sound wave in the ether. Yeah, because sound is not an emission, but we all have the idea of a speed of sound. Speed of sound changes, which is actually the rate of induction or hysteresis of the disturbance on denser, i.e. colder air. Actual propagation rate of sound changes. This is undeniable. This is demonstrable, but it's not an emission. It's the disturbance of a medium. Same is true, of course, regarding light. Light is not an emission. It's the hysteresis, sort of the rate of induction of the medium against itself. This is why Nikola Tesla said light is nothing in the sound wave of an ether. They will tell you, and this is not my opinion, you can go look this up on Wikipedia or any other place, they will tell you what's happening on a magnet is the field around it. Of course, they never define the word field, but they'll tell you that a magnet is emitting virtual photons, or they'll say virtual particles. These are not the inputs or outputs of any experiment ever done. They've never been observed. They're completely conceptual. They're demonstrably and objectively no different than saying unicorns and leprechauns. I could say, what's happening outside of a magnet is the emission of leprechauns. They're really, really tiny. You can't see. They absolutely, not my opinion, will tell you that a magnet is emitting virtual photons or virtual particles. This is a conceptual abstraction, has no basis in reality. It is pure and absolute total poppycock, hogwash, and nonsense with no basis in reality. It is logically laughable. I mean, it's just drunk off your butt insanity. It's just absolute insanity. But they give reification to this. See, if somebody else doesn't understand something, they'll point out the splinter in their eye, but they'll completely ignore the giant log in their eye, which is this reification. Yeah, what's going on? Did they say this? Don't take my word for it. Go Google it. It's happening in magnets emitting emission of virtual photons. Okay. They also tell you, say, excuse me, sir. Excuse me. You know, the power lines going out in back of my house, back of your house. It's in the flow of, it'll say the flow of electrons. Of course, by the way, there's no such thing as an electron. The concept and the principle of same, of course, exists, but the discoverer of same, J.J. Thomson, said that the principle of the electron is 1 unit of dielectric induction. It's not a particle. He said, excuse me, sir, is not charge and discharge the flow of electrons? Yes, 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 invariably so. I've actually debated these people hundreds of times on this, including some prestigious experts in field theory. Of course, they never define a field, even though they call themselves experts in field theory. You say, well, how does wireless power induction work? Well, you know, because there's nothing. There's no contact there. Wireless power induction. Then they will say, they always answer the same way. They say, well, it's lines of force. Force is not a thing. And neither is happiness a thing in and of itself. No one can say, oh, look, there's happiness. Like, no, who is happy? No, happiness. No, who is happy? It's an attribute of something else. You know, Bob, Sue, or Larry are happy. Force of what, by what, and upon what, and due to what causation. Lines of force? Lines? What lines? Lines is another concept. They will say, how does wireless power induction work? I thought you said, which they did, and always do say, charge and discharge is the flow of electrons. Invariably so. Invariably, meaning always. How does wireless power induction work? You know, just say you don't know. I would have a lot more respect for you if you said you didn't know. You know, I don't know the answer to that. Instead of saying fields or saying ether, which they don't believe in. By the way, when you say ether to these people, it's like screaming Beelzebub or Satan in the middle of a church service. Satan! Like, oh my God! They literally treat the word ether like somebody yelling out, you know, Lucifer in the middle of a church service. Lucifer! Ah! They'll say lines of force. Lines? By the way, where they get this idea of lines from is a constructive and destructive interference. You actually see in the case of magnetic interference or the double slit experiment, they'll see constructive and destructive interference, which have little lines. Lines are not a thing. They're not a force. They're not a field. But they'll say lines of force. Force of what, by what, upon. They engage in circular logic and circular reasoning, which is not logical at all, and it's not reasoning. It's the absence of logic and the absence of reason. These people pretend to know stuff. Like, look at me, I have a PhD in physics. It's wonderful. You're smarter than the average Joe who only, you know, snorts six-packs and, you know, might hammer, you know, be a construction worker or something, but you still don't know anything. You pretend to. Nobody goes looking to the answers to things that they tell everybody they already know the answers to. Ask them what is energy. Some people have tried to argue with me about that. We know what energy is. It's the ability to do work. None of these people ever define what energy is. And I read from what they'll quite say. Energy is the quantitative property that's transferred to a body or to a physical system, recognizable in the performance of work. Well, if it were quantity, it would be a particle, and particles are systems. Energy would have to be a subsystem to a particle if you're going to engage in that sort of atomistic reasoning, which is already defunct. You can't say the particle itself is the energy. Sure it is, matter to energy transfer. Nikola Tesla derided that, and that would be down another rabbit hole, which would require an entire video of itself. Common forms of energy that we'll say can include kinetic energy, meaning it's moving, and potential energy. Kinetic only means something is moving. That doesn't say that you've depleted the energy or inertia of the particle or a subsystem of same has been removed. It's just moving! It's energy! Something moving. Now, of course, I burned calories to move this lead ball, but I mean, if the lead ball is already moving of its own accord without friction, the movement of same doesn't imply energy as being either dissipated from the system or applied to the system. Sure it does. Can you prove that? Well, no, I can't. I thought you said you knew what energy was. It's the ability to do work. It's just what I told you from the begin with. You weren't listening to me, boy. Joules, watts, volts, amps described are not energy, but the quantification of the loss of energy. Maxwellian field equations never define what a field is, rather the output of energy over a period of time with a given vector. What is energy? In itself of itself, by itself before it's released and transformed into either heat or kinetics, is inertia, the original definition and denotation of the term inertia. Non-Cartesian, pure potential. All energy denotatively, vis-a-vis retroductive logic, is non-Cartesian, i.e. in counter space. This is the same reason why the higher the frequency, the smaller the spatial volume, which equals the higher capacitance. The smaller the space, the higher the capacitance. This is the reason why energy exists in greater form, the smaller the space. This is the same reason why explaining voltage versus amperage is like explaining dielectricity, which is voltage, compared to magnetism, which is amperage. What is this even simpler explanation to explain voltage and amperage to a little Johnny? Little Johnny doesn't get it, but he's watched like boxing videos maybe. He's like, explain voltage and amperage or dielectricity and magnetism to little Johnny. Little Johnny, you want to know what dielectricity and energy is? Sure. Dielectricity or voltage is like a prized super boxer who's asleep, right? He's got all his boxing gear on and he's fast asleep, you know. He's napping. He's just laying there. He's at rest. Except in the case of highest voltage or absolute capacitance, he would be invisible. Like true, imagine the highest pure potential, you know, the boxer is resting up and he's regaining his energy because he's tired, and that's why he's resting. We'd have to take it a little further and say that the boxer completely disappeared from the physical universe. Yeah? If the boxer were our analogy of pure capacitance or pure dielectricity. Because all lightning discharge is a discharge into counter space, by the way. It's not a discharge between cloud and ground, which is an accurate observation and an accurate description, but an inaccurate explanation. The same thing with gravity. Hey, gravity's objects accelerate towards one another. No, they're not. Sure it is. You can see it right there. Look at this gravity. They are. But they're not going towards one another. They're going towards this little spot right here, which there's nothing. There's nothing there! Why do you think they're going there? Because I actually understand counter space and I understand capacitance, which you don't. So little Johnny, this is what dielectricity and voltage would be. It'd be like the sleeping, you know, super boxer. And amperage / magnetism would be like the boxer awake and, you know, he's laying haymakers. You know, he's... Because voltage doesn't kill. Amperage kills. Yeah? You could say there's 1,000,000 volts laying on the couch asleep. 10 million volts, like the biggest prize fighter. He's asleep on the couch, like voltage doesn't kill. That's like the boxer that's asleep. You know, he's no danger. You know he's dangerous, potentially. That's pure potential. Yeah? The dangerous boxer, which is little Johnny, is analogous to amperage, and magnetism is the boxer that's fully awake, fully rested, drank his electrolytes, and he's at his top form, and he's laying It's like, oh, little Johnny gets it! If you can't explain it simply to a child, then you don't understand it. So ask any of these questions to these so-called, I've got a PhD in physics. They don't know the answers to any of these things, which would be okay if they would say, I don't know. I really, really, really want to know because I am a seeker of truth. I don't know the answer to those big questions, but they don't say that. I know what it is. It is a quantum interaction in the quantum field, and the Maxwellian field equations dictate that. It's like, you don't understand anything. They're self-contradictory. They make up leprechauns. I said leprechauns. Leprechauns and unicorns to explain what the field is outside of a magnet for a virtual photon. Well, that's ridiculous. They can't tell you what energy is. They don't know what field is. They have no clue what space is. They have no idea what gravity is. They can't explain polarity. They reify waves. Waves! Waves of what? Waves! Waves. They love to say waves and quantum. Waves, quantum wave interaction, and a wave quantum interaction on the quantum field level of the quantum wave. They're not logical. They have almost no wisdom at all. And they're not sensible. So ask these questions to those people next time you come across them, because they don't know. They don't know. Which would be fine, but they won't admit it. And this, of course, is called hubris. Hubris. Mother Nature is really simple. She's a muddy feet, hairy armpit chick, and she doesn't have a calculator, and she doesn't have a slide rule. Everything's simplex pressure mediation. Everything's force of motion, inertia, and acceleration. Thank you so much for watching. If you like these videos, you can click the link below. Any donations are always warmly welcome. If you ever want to email me, my email's in the description below as well. Thank you.